We are biologically built for the lowlands. Past a certain elevation, the human body begins to shut down. Yet, we have always been drawn upward. For a long time, historians assumed pre-modern societies viewed high peaks strictly as terrifying places, the forbidden domains of gods and certain death. The archaeological record tells a different story. High in the Andes, at 17,000 feet, researchers discovered 500-year-old Incan shrines and the preserved remains of those who made the journey. People braved extreme altitudes long before the invention of modern gear, driven by survival and worship. It is often claimed that a 14th-century European poet named Petrarch was the first person to climb a mountain simply for the experience. But centuries earlier, Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Xuanzang crossed 6,000-meter Karakoram peaks during his travels. For 99% of human history, scaling a mountain was an act of deep reverence, spiritual pilgrimage, or sheer survival. The idea of climbing as a sport, a secular conquest, is a surprisingly recent invention. That shift began in the Alps. In 1786, a doctor and a farmer, Michel Picard and Jacques Balmat, reached the summit of Mont Blanc. They weren't seeking religious enlightenment. They were motivated by scientific curiosity and adventure. This animated cross-section shows the severe limitations of their gear. On the left, traditional wool absorbs up to 30% of its weight and water, which could freeze solid on a climber. On the right is modern EPTFE membrane, like Gore-Tex, which deflects liquid. Early climbers faced extreme alpine environments, draped in heavy, wet fabric. Despite these limitations, Europeans systematically scaled the major peaks of the Alps. This era peaked in 1865, when Edward Whymper's team summited the Matterhorn, relying on a burgeoning system of professional local guides to navigate the treacherous routes. But the descent proved fatal. A snapped rope sent 4 members of Whymper's party falling to their deaths. Human ambition had far outpaced the safety standards of their equipment. With the major alpine summits mapped and climbed, European explorers looked eastward. The next logical target was the Himalayas, a mountain range on an entirely different scale of hostility. By the 1920s, British expeditions became obsessed with Mount Everest. To push past 27,000 feet, they introduced crude, heavy supplemental oxygen sets, like this one from 1922, which money traditionalists viewed as cheating. During the 1924 expedition, veteran climber George Mallory selected 22-year-old Andrew Irvine as his partner for a final summit push. Irvine lacked climbing experience, but Mallory chose him specifically because of his mechanical ability to repair these unreliable oxygen tanks. The 2 men disappeared into the mist near the summit. The recent discovery of Irvine's partial remains in 2024 has reignited a century-old debate over whether they reached the top before perishing. We may never know what happened in 1924. The first confirmed successful ascent wouldn't happen for another 29 years, when Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reached the highest point on Earth. Before beginning their descent, Tenzing Norgay paused. He buried an offering of biscuits and chocolate in the snow, a quiet gesture that bridged the modern drive for conquest with the ancient tradition of spiritual reverence. These early Himalayan campaigns proved a harsh reality. Raw determination was useless on its own. Reaching these altitudes required a precise combination of emerging technology and deep indigenous expertise. Everest is just one of 14 independent peaks on Earth that rise above 8,000 meters. But a mountain's sheer height does not dictate how difficult it is to climb. This chart ranks the 14 8,000ers based on a 7-factor difficulty model. Cho Oyu sits at the bottom as the least technical standard route. Annapurna I scores exceptionally high for its uncontrollable hazards, and K2 ranks at the very top. Notice Mount Everest down here, ranked 4th easiest. Its extreme altitude rating is offset by massive commercial infrastructure, artificially lowering its overall logistical difficulty. Regardless of the route, all 14 of these peaks penetrate the death zone, the altitude above 8,000 meters, where the atmospheric pressure is simply too low to sustain human life. This animation shows what happens inside the death zone. Red blood cells pass through the lung alveoli, but the ambient pressure is so weak that oxygen molecules fail to bind to them. Denied oxygen, the body literally begins to consume its own tissues to survive. To stave off acute mountain sickness, climbers must follow punishing acclimatization schedules, ascending and descending for weeks just to force their biology to briefly tolerate the thin air. Because no technology can permanently alter human biology, every hour spent in the death zone is a timed race against cellular death. This infrastructure is built by the Sherpa people, elite athletes with distinct biological adaptations to high altitude, who construct the very lifelines Western climbers depend on. Even with the best support, every climber faces objective hazards: crevasses, serac falls, and avalanches. These are environmental dangers completely indifferent to a climber's skill level, gear, or years of experience. In the Himalayas, these hazards occur on a staggering scale. A slight temperature shift or a random stress fracture can trigger thousands of tons of ice to violently collapse down a vertical face with zero warning. The danger is absolute. In 2026, an avalanche on Broad Peak claimed Nims Purja's life, a record-breaking mountaineer who had previously scaled all 14 8,000ers. A century of technological advancement has produced lighter gear and better oxygen systems, but the mountain's absolute authority over life and death remains entirely unchallenged. This graph tracks tourism in Sagarmatha National Park, exploding from 3,600 permits in 1979 to 58,000 in 2019, contrasting with declining Himalayan glacier mass. As glaciers recede, they unmask a grim reality: decades of abandoned equipment, trash, and fallen climbers. Commercial traffic jams and fixed ropes reflect a distinctly human ego. But above the crowds, the high peaks remain isolating, indifferent, and violently beautiful. The ancient landscape poets understood something we often forget. We do not go to the mountains to conquer them. We go to dissolve our own egos into their vastness, returning to the quiet reverence where this long journey began.